In the aftermath of absolute power, the king has returned to take his rightful place as ruler of the seven seas, but not all is well in the kingdom of Atlantis. Today we're going to be taking a look at Aquaman #1, written by Jeremy Adams and illustrated by John Timms. Let me know down in the comments what you guys thought of the first issue of this brand new series. I'm Brennan for the New Wave Nerds. Subscribe down below for more nerd content and commentary. Now let's roll the intro. Alright, so as always, we're going to begin with a brief non-spoiler review here. Now at the outset, I'm going to say that Aquaman has always held a special place in my heart. It always hurts me a little bit when he gets dogged on because he can only talk to fish or whatever the claims may be, but I've always been of the opinion that Aquaman is one of the most interesting characters and certainly one of the stronger of the DC heroes. I think the implication and the viewpoint of him has been influenced by things like the Super Friends and various other adaptations, but I've always really enjoyed the character. Now, despite that, I certainly wouldn't consider him one of my favorites, and I probably wouldn't have considered him one of my favorites for at least the past 10 years. When I was younger, I was much more into Aquaman. I read a lot of the comics, but since then, he has really fallen out of favor with me. So coming into this, I was a little apprehensive. I wasn't sure what to expect. I didn't know what necessarily was going on with Aquaman in the universe. Since then, I've obviously gone back and read a few comics to sort of get my feet wet, as it were. Haha, little wordplay. But to learn a little bit more about the very recent history of the character. And I have to say that this comic, I think, is very well written. Now, over the past few videos, I have sung the praises of Jeremy Adams as a writer. I very much enjoy his style. I've read most of the work that I've read from him has been his Green Lantern run, and I wasn't quite sure how that would translate over to Aquaman, but I think it does so very well. I think it gives us a good insight into the mind of this character, the sort of reluctant king, if you will. I think it's very interesting, and I love the art style of John Timms in this. It's incredibly beautiful, especially when we get to, massive monsters, kaijus made out of water. The cover art is incredible. I'm a really big fan, and I'm interested to see how this is going to, I'm interested to see how this is going to evolve moving forward. How is this going to change the King of the Seven Seas, the King of Atlantis, and how are we going to work in all of this stuff? There's a lot of interesting things being laid out here in the very opening issue, and I'm certainly excited to see what happens in the series moving forward. Now, let's get into the actual meat of the comic. So as I said, Aquaman has finally returned as the King of the Seven Seas. For a while, Mera had taken over duties, and before that, there was somebody else whom she had to wrest control from, but Aquaman is back in his rightful place. Don't get me wrong, I really enjoy Mera. I think she's an incredibly interesting character. I love the interplay between her and Aquaman. I'm glad to see that they are building this family and becoming a unit and being happy together and struggling to solve these problems worldwide together. I think it's very interesting. But an important part of the Aquaman mythos is actually having him be the king of Atlantis, or at least striving to become that. And so I'm glad to see that we have returned to the status quo here. I think that's going to be really interesting, especially considering the story moving forward. And also it makes a lot of sense, right? Atlantis elects their rulers, and they chose Aquaman because they felt as though they needed a strong leader in a time of crisis. And that is exactly what happens immediately following the beginning of this book. Atlantis is immediately thrown into an even graver crisis than we have seen up until now. And I think it's going to be really interesting moving forward. Now, apart from the fact that Aquaman has returned as the king, in the aftermath of absolute power, he has also absorbed Mera's hydrokinesis, so the ability to control water. And I think that that is really cool. It obviously makes a lot of sense here, and I'm curious to see how Arthur Curry is going to master this new skill because he's obviously going to have to continue this journey and to save his people. I really liked the way that they introduced this new power in the comic. It throws Aquaman immediately into a hero situation where he has to use the abilities to save a bunch of innocents. And it is very in keeping with the hero aspect here, throwing him directly into the fire or the water, as it were. It's a trial by water, if you will. I think the paneling is very well done there, and I really enjoy this sequence. So in the comic, there is a plane that is, going down over the ocean, and Aquaman jumps atop the plane and, advised by Mera, naturally being tutored by Mera, has to control the ocean water below them to save all of the innocents on board and to stop the plane from crashing into the ocean. And I think it's really, really interesting. Like I said earlier, the artwork here is absolutely beautiful. I am curious, however, how long is this going to last? Obviously, with the ongoing Justice League Atom Project series, we are watching the process of trying to return powers to their quote-unquote rightful users. So I'm curious, how is the Atom Project going to play out? Are they even going to be able to achieve their goal of returning the powers to their rightful owners? I can't imagine that this is going to stay with Aquaman. I have to imagine that it's going to revert to form at some point, but I think it's going to make for really, really interesting storytelling up until that point. Now, the main conflict of this issue, or maybe conflict isn't necessarily the right word to use here, but the main event of this issue is the apparent destruction of Atlantis. And the way that it happens is I would say relatively ambiguous. Obviously, we presumably know the thing which has exactly caused the destruction of Atlantis. Although I'm not 100% sure on that. I think Jeremy Adams is holding out some information here, and we're going to learn a little bit more about what's going on. But to get into the actual destruction of Atlantis, we have to go back a little bit. So first, let me say, in this comic, the way that this artifact is introduced is Aquaman returns from saving the plane crash. He returns to Atlantis, and he is about to go into meetings, and Jackson Hyde, Aquaman 2, he, asks for a brief word with Arthur Curry, and he tells him that he's come into contact with this strange artifact, and they are unable to determine what it truly is. Now, using Garth, or Tempest as he's known, they've been able to determine that the orb is clearly magic in origin, but the source of that magic is completely unknown. Now, in the footnotes of the issue here, it says, I should say that the artifact is this incredibly large pearl, an orb, if you will. And when I say large, I mean it is like, what's a good comparison? I don't know. It is like probably watermelon sized, like full watermelon sized. It's a massive orb. And in the footnote of the comic panel there, they say, see Flash 785, Batman Brave and the Bold number 18, and Flashpoint Beyond number 1. Not necessarily in that order, because I think Brave and the Bold is the last comic that they describe. Now, naturally, when I was reading this, I was like, ooh, cool. Perhaps we're going to get some in-depth backstory. Maybe this is an established artifact that I'm just unaware of, because, like I said, I haven't really read a lot of Aquaman for quite a long time. And so I read those issues, and really, they didn't give us any more information. Like, they didn't really necessarily explain anything, and we don't even necessarily get the full breadth of the power of this artifact. So in Flash 785, they're I believe, I don't remember the characters' names. I think it's Jesse Quick, and I think his name's Max. I don't know. I'm not necessarily super familiar with the Flash family, to be honest. But I will be reading the all-in series at some point soon here. I swear this to you. But in any case, they go to an alternate universe, and there is an aged Barry Allen there who uses the orb to disrupt the goings-on of an enemy faction. And that's pretty much all they say. We don't necessarily get to see the orb as we see it in other issues. We don't get any backstory whatsoever. We just know that Flash has this orb and he's going to use it to presumably save the world. All right. And then that's all. And that's a Dark Crisis tie-in. And so then after that, we completely shift to something else. And then we see it again in Flashpoint Beyond. And in this universe, this is a continuation of the Flashpoint series in some ways. It is a continuation of the Flashpoint universe, if nothing else. So, brief history lesson in this universe, instead of Thomas and Martha Wayne being, murdered in an alley, Bruce gets murdered instead. And so Thomas Wayne becomes the Batman. Now, I'm not going to get too in-depth in here in this, but in that story, the main conflict is between the Amazons, humanity, and the Atlanteans. They are all battling over the fate of the Earth. And that, ends with the Flashpoint series ends with, a relatively positive story. And then from that, we get the beginning of the New 52 universe. And then we flash forward to, I believe this was in 2022, 21. In any case, somewhere in the 2020s. And we see the resurgence of this Flashpoint universe, which again, I'm not going to go into too much detail as to why it returns, but it returns, and the conflict between the Amazons and the Atlanteans is ongoing. And in this universe, Aquaman is going to use this orb to end the battle, to end the war, and to take over the Earth. But again, we don't really get to see much information there. We don't get to learn about the history of this orb, why or how Aquaman has it, or how or why he's going to use it to destroy the Earth. We just know that that is the state of affairs, and we know that it is activated by Aquaman's trident. Okay, and then the next time we see this orb is in Batman Brave and the Bold number 18. One of the stories in that comic, because this is that series, as I understand it, is set up of like 4 mini stories per issue. One of the stories in this case follows Jackson Hyde and Miss Martian, who are investigating some goings on, and they are taken to Mars, and on Mars, they encounter a white Martian who is going to use the orb, or rather who is using the orb, to steal the water away from Earth and to take it to Mars so that they can turn Mars into this paradise. Now, naturally, Jackson Hyde and Miss Martian disagree, and they stop him, and they take the orb back, and that's really all the backstory we get for this thing. Very, very limited. So I'm really interested to see what is the history of this thing. Presumably, we're going to learn a lot more through the issues in this series, and I'm really excited to see what happens. So Jackson Hyde says, we've got this orb, blah-de-blah. The rest of the comic takes place. Aquaman encounters a massive water kaiju, which I mentioned earlier. He goes and stops it, and immediately after stopping that, he hears Mera scream out, and he swims as fast as he can back to Atlantis and finds the entire city destroyed. Everything is destroyed. There's no people. There are ruins of buildings, and the only thing that remains is this orb, this pearl. Now, the aesthetics of the pearl change here. Previously, it had just been, your pearl-colored pearl. It was opalescent, it was white and shiny. But then after the destruction of Atlantis, it is glowing and it is golden. And Aquaman naturally has to get to the bottom of this, so he takes the orb to the Watchtower, to the base of Justice League Unlimited, and he's asking Batman, he asks for Batman, they go to the lab, and Zatanna, I'm not 100% sure how to pronounce that, actually. I know that I have seen a lot of things where it is pronounced. I'm a big fan of Young Justice, and she's a recurring character in that. But I'm blanking on how they say it in that. I'm just going to say Zatanna. I think Zatanna Zatara sounds better than Zatanna Zatara, but I don't know. In any case, Zatanna is working her magic. She is trying to determine the origin of this thing, and she can't. She's unable to determine where it's from, what it does, but she learns that it is an incredibly ancient magic. Incredibly, incredibly ancient. And what's more is that she realizes that there is a similar magical signature somewhere in the ocean. And so Aquaman, Batman, and Wonder Woman go and investigate, and it is a seaweed encrusted gate in the ocean, just a circular object. Now, Aquaman, as he's swimming up to it, he feels the orb in his satchel or whatever. He feels it calling. He feels that there is the connection between these two, and he says that he feels the orb wanting him to let it free. And so he releases the orb, and the orb goes into this, circular object and produces a gateway. Naturally, Aquaman, there's some back and forth where Wonder Woman or Batman's like, hey, man, we don't know what's going to be here. Could be death on the other side. And Aquaman goes, it could be Atlantis. And so he dives in. And after Aquaman dives into the gate, we get this panel of Wonder Woman and Batman floating in the ocean, staring at this gateway, which is now free of the seaweed that has encrusted it. And it's revealed that the base structure for this gateway is an omega, the symbol of apocalypse. Okay. Now that poses some really, really interesting questions. At least they're interesting to me, at least. What is the connection here? What's the connection between this orb and Darkseid? Because presumably the orb is not like an apocalyptian artifact. Apocalyptian? I don't know if that's the proper way to describe something that is from the planet of Apocalypse. It sounds almost correct, but not quite. I don't know. In any case, it doesn't appear like most technology from Apocalypse. It seems very aesthetically different. It seems completely different in every way. And presumably, if it were from Apocalypse, that would be the type of thing that Zatanna. That seems like the type of thing that Zatanna would be able to detect, right? I mean, the Justice League and Zatanna herself have had plenty of interactions with Darkseid, with Apocalypse in general. And so presumably the signatures would be similar. But she was unable, and she said that it was ancient. Ancient. So what is the connection between these two? I'm not so sure, but I'm really excited to see what is going to go on here. Now, in the final page of the Aquaman comic, we see an interview with Jeremy Adams where he hints that Aquaman is going to be traversing this plane of existence, which is called the Blue. Sometimes it's called the Clear. I think the wiki page is called the Clear, but I think the Blue is a much better name, especially considering we have things like the Green, which is the force that empowers the Swamp Thing, and the Red, which empowers Beast Boy. The Green is this plane where all things nature and life are connected. The Red is where all animal life comes from, and the Blue is where all the aquatic life comes from. And so how is this going to affect the powers of Aquaman? I think it's possible that traversing the Blue is going to empower Aquaman to such an extent. How is this going to affect his journey in learning these powers? How are these powers going to serve him in the Blue? I'm very curious about what's going on here. Also in this interview here at the end, Jeremy Adams says, the interviewer asks a question about Mara and Jackson Hyde, what role they're going to play, and he's a little coy about that. But then he says, as for other allies, there will be many Sorry, I got to zoom in here. There will be many... My eyes are too bad. There will be many new and old characters that might appear as Arthur goes through the blue. Now, what are these new and old characters? I mean, obviously, if they're new characters, there would be literally no way to guess them. I'm not so sure. Presumably with old characters, perhaps we're going to see the Parliament of the Blue, which is, the sort of governing body of this extra plane of existence. The green has the Parliament of Trees, and the same goes for the red as well. As far as I know it, the blue is an aspect of the DC universe that has not really been explored a lot. And so I'm curious to see, if that's true, and I'm not just unfamiliar with all of the thousands of issues of source material, how is this mythology going to evolve? How is this going to expand on things that have been established before or establish completely new things? What is the blue like? And why is the gateway to such shaped in an omega? I mean, that's incredibly, incredibly curious to me. What impact does Darkseid have in all of this? I wonder. I guess the chief question is, was this gateway always here, and was it always in the shape of an omega, or is this something that was changed following the events of the DC All-In Special? As I mentioned on previous comic book reviews, in the All-In Special, Darkseid essentially sacrificed himself and committed a form of ritual suicide, I suppose, so that his essence would be dispersed, and so that he could form a completely separate world using his own energy, using Darkseid energy, a world filled with strife and troubles and hardship. So when I read that, I mean, my assumption was that the echoes of Darkseid mostly only affected the Elseworld, the universe of the Absolute comics. But following this and following the few issues of Challengers of the Unknown that have been released, it's clear that Darkseid's essence has affected Prime Earth as well. To what extent is that? Has the essence of Darkseid corrupted the blue? I mean, I think that would be really, really interesting to see. How does that work out? I have no idea, but I am incredibly, incredibly excited. This comic got me a lot more interested in Aquaman than I expected. I came into this not really knowing what to think, what to feel. I came into this sort of expecting to not really enjoy it all that much, but I am sufficiently hooked by the mysteries here, and I think that is all due to the writing of Jeremy Adams and is assisted heavily by the art of John Timms. I think this is going to be a really, really fun series, and I can't wait to see what happens next. Now, issue number 2 of this is going to be released February 12th, which is actually the day before this video is going to be published. I had considered putting off the issue, or rather, I wanted to put off the episode until the next issue came out, but issue number 2 is not going to be available at my comic book shop because, unfortunately, it's just not a very in-demand issue. And additionally, I was looking at Amazon because I was going to buy the digital version so I could at least read that, but according to Amazon at least, the book isn't going to be released until the 19th, which is the next week. And I really wanted to put this out, and I really wanted to discuss it so I could work through some of these ideas and feelings that I have as I was talking. So hopefully we will have some answers. Hopefully you will know the answers to the questions that I asked. Let me know down in the comments if you guys thought that this issue was good. Let me know if you think Jeremy Adams is going to be able to provide a resurgence in the popularity of Aquaman. Let me know if you enjoyed the comic as well as I did, or if you just hate it. In any case, I'm very interested to hear your thoughts. And let's see. We are going to be back here next Tuesday for a review of John Wick, a movie that somehow I hadn't seen up until this point, but finally I subjected myself to it, and I've definitely got some thoughts, so you want to stick around until Tuesday. And then on next Thursday, our next comic book review, we will be taking a look at the current Nightwing run, the DC All-In initiative written by Dan Watters. I am really enjoying the comic book so far. I didn't realize how much fun Nightwing really was until I had read these issues and the issues leading up to it. So I'm really excited to see how that evolves moving forward. But for my full thoughts, you are just going to have to wait until next Thursday. I know it'll be tough, but I believe in you all. And with that, I will see you guys on Tuesday.